Welcome back to WealthWise, the podcast where clarity meets strategy. Let's be honest, we are bombarded with headlines every single day. Political turmoil, international conflicts, market fluctuations. It's a lot of noise, and it's easy to feel like most of it is happening in a world completely separate from our own. But what if I told you that a single political decision made thousands of miles away in a narrow strip of water could have a more direct impact on your financial future than almost any stock tip you'll ever hear? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a topic that is critically important but often ignored: geopolitics and your wallet. Specifically, we're diving deep into the Strait of Hormuz, a name you might have heard in the news, and unpacking how tensions there can create a seismic shock that ripples directly into your bank account. Our guide for this conversation is the perfect person for the job. He's Max Wise, a geopolitical risk analyst and former energy sector strategist, who spends his days connecting the dots between world events and market movements. By the end of this episode, you're going to learn three crucial things. 1, why this tiny waterway is considered the jugular vein of the global economy. 2, the exact domino effect, how it triggers everything from the price you pay at the pump to your mortgage rates and your 401k balance. And 3, most importantly, how to start building a financially resilient life that can withstand these unpredictable global shocks. Max, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on WealthWise. Welcome.
Sarah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Max, I want to start with the fundamental problem. Most of us, especially those in our 20s and 30s focused on our careers and building wealth, see a headline about Iran or the Middle East and we scroll right past it. We think that's a political issue happening over there. It doesn't affect me. Why is that disconnect, that psychological distance, so profoundly misunderstood and potentially dangerous for our financial health?
Sarah, you've hit the nail on the head. That psychological distance is the single biggest misconception. We have a cognitive bias that makes us believe that things happening far away are less important or less impactful than things happening next door. In the world of global finance and supply chains, that bias is a trap. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a location on a map. It's a non-negotiable artery for the global economy. To put it in perspective, 1/5 of the entire world's daily oil consumption passes through that choke point. We're talking about 20 million barrels of oil every single day. Imagine, every 5th time you fill up your car, the raw material for that gasoline likely came from a tanker that navigated that exact tiny sliver of water. When Iran threatens to close it, it's not a distant political statement. It's someone putting their hands around the world's economic throat. And this isn't theoretical. We have real-world case studies happening right now. Just recently, reports came out that nearly 50 massive oil tankers were scrambling to leave the Persian Gulf, almost in a panic, on the expectation that the strait could be blockaded. Think about that. This isn't a scene from a Hollywood movie. These are real captains on satellite phones, logistics managers rerouting billion-dollar assets, and insurance premiums for these voyages skyrocketing in real time. It's a palpable sense of panic in the circulatory system of the global economy. The best analogy for an American audience is this. Imagine if a hostile power could, at any moment, shut down the I-95 corridor on the East Coast or the I-5 on the West Coast. Not for a city, but for the entire country's commerce. The paralysis would be immediate. The Strait of Hormuz is the I-95 of global energy. So when we see that headline, the mistake is viewing it through a political lens. We should be viewing it through a supply chain lens. It's not about taking sides in a conflict. It's about understanding that there is a direct economic gravity that pulls these events right to our front door. And that's where the dominoes really start to fall, cascading from global markets right down to the decisions we have to make in our own lives, which I think is exactly what we need to break down next.
Okay, Max, you've laid out the big picture perfectly. You called the Strait of Hormuz the I-95 of global energy, which is a powerful and, frankly, a little terrifying analogy. So let's connect the dots for our listeners. let's assume the worst case or even a partial disruption scenario happens. Walk us through the immediate chain reaction. What is the step-by-step domino effect for an ordinary person in their 20s or 30s just trying to get by?
Absolutely. This is where the abstract headline becomes incredibly tangible. The first and most immediate domino to fall is the price of crude oil itself. We're not talking about a small jump. Analysts at major banks like JP Morgan have modeled scenarios where a sustained closure could send oil prices soaring to $130 a barrel or even higher. For context, that's a price level we haven't seen consistently in over a decade. So, domino number one, the price at the pump. This is the most visible impact. Every American feels this one. That $130 barrel price doesn't stay on a trader screen in New York. It translates directly to you paying significantly more to fill up your car. Maybe an extra $20, $30, even $50 per tank. That immediately eats into disposable income. But that's just the beginning. Domino number two is what economists call cost-push inflation. This is a much more insidious effect. Oil isn't just gasoline. It's a critical input for, well, almost everything. The plastics in your phone, the fertilizer for the food you eat, and most importantly, the diesel that powers the trucks, trains, and ships that move every single product you buy. So when oil gets expensive, shipping gets expensive. Your Amazon Prime delivery, the cost to get it to your door goes up. The price of an avocado shipped from Mexico, it goes up. The cost for a factory to produce anything from furniture to clothing, it goes up. Suddenly, it's not just your gas bill, it's your grocery bill, your utility bill, and the price tag on that new pair of sneakers. Everything has a hidden energy cost, and that cost is now exploding.
And I imagine the Federal Reserve is watching this with alarm bells going off, right? Because their primary mandate is to control inflation.
Exactly. Which brings us to domino number three, higher interest rates for longer. For the past couple of years, the Fed's entire battle has been against inflation. A sudden oil shock is like throwing gasoline on that fire. To combat this new wave of inflation, the Fed would almost certainly be forced to keep interest rates higher than they'd like for much longer than the market expects. And what does that mean for our listener? It means the cost of borrowing money stays painfully high. If you're trying to buy your first home, that 7% mortgage rate you were hoping would come down might stay put or even tick higher. The interest on your car loan? Higher. The APR on your credit card balance? It gets worse. It effectively puts a financial chokehold on major life milestones for young people. This leads us to the final domino, number four, consumer pullback and market pressure. When your gas, groceries, and mortgage are all more expensive, what do? You cut back on the non-essentials. You eat out less. You delay buying that new TV. You cancel a vacation. When millions of people do this simultaneously, corporate profits start to shrink. And when profits shrink, stock prices fall. So your 401k or your personal investment portfolio takes a direct hit. And there you have it. A political threat in the Middle East has cascaded down, making your commute, your food, your house, and your retirement savings all more expensive and less valuable. It connects directly.
That's an incredibly clear and sobering breakdown. It really feels like the problem isn't just the price of gas, it's the price of everything.
That's the perfect way to put it. The real story isn't the price at the pump. It's the hidden energy tax that gets added to every single transaction in your life. The issue isn't just the cost of fuel, it's the cost of living.
Okay, listening to that domino effect, it's easy to feel a sense of dread, like this is an unprecedented crisis we're walking into. But you're a student of history, Max. Have we stood on this precipice before? And if so, what can the past teach us about how these threats actually play out?
That is such a crucial question, Sarah, because context is everything. And the good news, if you can call it that, is that we have been here before. This isn't our first rodeo with threats to the Strait of Hormuz. Let's go back in time. In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, we had what was literally called the Tanker War. Both sides were actively attacking commercial oil tankers in the Gulf to disrupt each other's economies. It was a hot conflict zone. The U.S. Navy even got involved to escort ships. But even then, with active military engagements, the strait was never fully and permanently closed. Trade was disrupted, insurance costs went through the roof, but the oil, for the most part, kept flowing. Fast forward to 2012. The U.S. and its allies imposed heavy sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program. In response, Iranian officials made very loud, very public threats to shut down the strait. The market got nervous. Oil prices spiked about 4% on the uncertainty alone. But again, it never happened. The strait remained open. The key lesson history teaches us is that there's a massive difference between a threat and an action. Closing the strait is Iran's most powerful piece of leverage. It's their trump card. But the moment you play your trump card, you lose all your leverage. It's a one-time move with catastrophic consequences for everyone, including and perhaps especially for Iran itself.
Why is it so damaging for them as well? You'd think it would hurt their enemies more.
You'd think so, but it's a classic case of mutually assured destruction, economically speaking. Firstly, Iran's own economy is heavily dependent on its ability to export its own oil, all of which goes through that same strait. Closing it would be like a shopkeeper boarding up their own front door to spite the customers. Secondly, and this is the key geopolitical factor people miss, who is the single biggest buyer of oil coming out of that region? China. China is one of Iran's most important and powerful allies. To close the strait would be to directly attack the economic interests of their biggest strategic partner. It would be an act of self-isolation on a global scale. So history shows us that these threats are more of a high-stakes geopolitical chess move. It's about creating fear, driving up prices to inflict economic pain, and gaining negotiating power on the world stage. It's a powerful signal, but pulling the trigger would be financial suicide. Threatening to close the strait is a powerful move in a global chess game, but actually doing it is like knocking over the board and setting your own king on fire. It's a checkmate against yourself.
That's a fascinating perspective. So, if history suggests a full, sustained closure is highly unlikely because it's a self-defeating move, and if we have some sort of contingency plans, then what, precisely, is the real thing we should be worried about? Is there a safety net? And if so, how strong is it?
Another excellent question, because it gets to the heart of risk management. Yes, there is a safety net. The United States maintains what's called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR. It was created in the 1970s precisely for this kind of emergency. It's a massive underground stockpile of hundreds of millions of barrels of crude oil. In the event of a major supply disruption, the president can authorize a release from the SPR to stabilize the market and keep prices from going completely haywire. Think of it like a spare tire for the economy. It's incredibly useful to get you out of a jam, but you don't want to drive on it for 500 miles. It's a temporary buffer, not a permanent solution. And that brings us to the real danger. The real risk isn't the 1 in a million chance of a permanent closure. The real, tangible, and costly danger is prolonged disruption and weaponized uncertainty. Markets can price in bad news. What they cannot price in is chaos. Let's go back to that insurance example. In just the last few weeks of heightened tension, the cost for an oil tanker to get insurance for a single voyage through the Gulf has reportedly jumped by 60%. That's not a future prediction. That's a real cost being paid today. That cost gets passed on to the buyer and eventually to us. The real danger is a month or 3 months or 6 months of close calls, of naval skirmishes, of tankers being harassed, of mines being discovered in shipping lanes. This creates a constant low-grade fever in the market. It forces companies to build more expensive, less efficient supply chains to avoid the region. It keeps investors on edge, leading to volatility in the stock market. It keeps that cost-push inflation you and I just talked about simmering, which in turn keeps pressure on the Fed and on our wallets. This persistent uncertainty is the poison. It drains confidence from the market and forces everyone to operate in a defensive crouch. And that's a terrible environment for economic growth and wealth creation. The greatest market risk isn't the catastrophe that happens. It's the shadow of the catastrophe that might. Uncertainty is a tax on everything. And right now, that tax is going up.
Max, that concept of weaponized uncertainty is so powerful. You analyze this kind of risk for a living, which sounds incredibly objective, driven by data and models. But I have to ask, has there ever been a time when one of these geopolitical events caught you off guard personally? A moment that wasn't just data on a screen, but a real, painful financial lesson that shaped how you think today?
Oh, absolutely. And anyone who says they haven't been humbled by the market is either lying or hasn't been in it long enough. For me, that moment came early in my career, around 2012. It was a situation eerily similar to today's: escalating tensions with Iran, sanctions, and very loud threats about closing the Strait of Hormuz. At the time, I was, let's say, confident. I was young, I'd had a few good years, and I thought I had the intellectual framework to see through the noise. I looked at the history, just as we've discussed, and I saw that the strait had never actually been closed. My analysis, my very logical conclusion, was that this was all political theater, saber-rattling. I told myself, the market is overreacting to headlines. This is a buying opportunity for anyone who isn't driven by fear. So, I did what my arrogant younger self thought was the smart, contrarian thing to do. I doubled down on my positions in energy companies and adjacent industries that I felt were being unfairly punished by this perceived risk. I was convinced I was smarter than the panic.
I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of thinking we've found an edge the rest of the market is missing.
Exactly. And the market has a brutal way of teaching you humility. The catastrophe I predicted wouldn't happen, didn't happen. The strait was never closed. On paper, my thesis was correct. But my bank account told a very different story. What I completely failed to appreciate was the slow, grinding power of sustained uncertainty. For months, the situation didn't resolve. There was a constant drip, drip, drip of negative headlines. A naval skirmish here, a new sanction there, an inflammatory quote from a general. There was no single crash, no dramatic one-day event. It was a slow bleed. I'd check my portfolio, and it would be down a little. A week later, down a little more. The insurance costs we talked about were eating into shipping company profits. The general market malaise was weighing on everything. My smart contrarian bet was being slowly eroded, not by a single event, but by the corrosive power of collective fear. After about 6 months of this, I finally capitulated and sold, not at the bottom, but after taking a significant, painful loss. And the lesson wasn't that my historical analysis was wrong. The lesson was that it was incomplete. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The big breakthrough for me was this. You don't need the disaster to actually happen to lose your money. You just need enough people to be afraid that it might happen for long enough. That experience fundamentally rewired my entire approach to risk. It taught me that market sentiment, driven by fear and uncertainty, isn't noise to be ignored. It is the signal. It's a real, tangible force with financial gravity. From that day on, geopolitical risk moved from a footnote in my analysis to a core variable in every single decision I make.
Wow, Max, thank you for sharing that. That story is such a powerful, personal reminder that risk isn't academic. So, looking forward and applying that hard-won lesson, if you had to bet on one major shift over the next 3 to 5 years, a trend born from this kind of volatility that will define financial success, what would it be?
If I had to point to one megatrend, It's the global pivot towards what I call infrastructure resilience and energy sovereignty. For decades, the world has operated on a model of maximum efficiency. We built just-in-time global supply chains that were incredibly lean and cost-effective, but also incredibly fragile. Events like the Hormuz tensions, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, they've all exposed the catastrophic weakness of that model. Every leader of every developed nation is looking at this situation and thinking, I cannot allow my country's economic destiny to be held hostage by a single choke point halfway across the world. The pursuit of efficiency is being replaced by the pursuit of resilience. So what does that look like in practice? It's not just about more solar panels and wind turbines, though that's part of it. It's the entire ecosystem that supports self-sufficiency. It's grid-scale battery storage, the companies developing the technology to store renewable energy so it can be used 24/7. It's the modernization of national power grids, making them smarter and more resistant to shocks. It's reshoring and nearshoring manufacturing, bringing critical production like semiconductors or pharmaceuticals back home or to friendly neighbors. It's even things like advanced water purification technology and vertical farming, all designed to reduce reliance on long, fragile supply chains. For our listeners, especially the younger investors, this is a monumental shift. The investment paradigm is changing. Don't just think about who is pulling oil out of the ground today. Think about who is building the resilient infrastructure of tomorrow. Ask yourself, who is making the most advanced batteries? Who owns the patents for next-generation grid software? Who is leading the charge in making our supply chains shorter, smarter, and stronger? The great fortunes of the next decade won't be made by exploiting the old, fragile systems, but by building the new, resilient ones.
Max, this has been an incredible masterclass in connecting the dots. You've taken a distant headline and made it feel immediate, tangible, and most importantly, understandable. We've learned that a choke point like the Strait of Hormuz is the global economy's jugular vein. We've seen how the real danger isn't necessarily a single catastrophe, but the corrosive power of sustained uncertainty. And you've just given us a powerful vision for where the future of smart investing is headed, towards resilience. For everyone listening, if you found as much value in this conversation as I did, here are 3 simple things you can do right now. First, share this episode. Send it to one friend or family member who you know sees these global headlines and thinks, that doesn't affect me. This conversation is the perfect antidote. Second, hit that subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're using. We have conversations just like this every week on WealthWise, designed to give you the clarity and strategy you need. And finally, join the conversation. Drop a comment below or send us a message on our socials. What's one global trend you're watching that you think others are missing? MaxWise, thank you so much for your time and your incredible insights today.
My pleasure, Sarah. It was a fantastic conversation.
And to all of you, thank you for tuning in. As you go about your week, remember this. You can't control the geopolitical chessboard, but you can absolutely control the moves you make with your own pieces. Financial freedom isn't about perfectly predicting the future. It's about building a strategy so strong that you don't have to. Until next time, this is WealthWise. Make it a great week.